All right, everybody, get ready because today we are taking a deep dive into the world of economic growth.
Ooh, exciting.
I know, right? And I think a lot of people hear economic growth and their eyes kind of glaze over, but, you know, trust me on this one. This is about so much more than just numbers and graphs.
It really is. Yeah.
It's about understanding the forces that shape our world, like everything from how much your rent costs to, what kind of job opportunities are out there.
Yeah, it's the heartbeat of any society, really.
Okay, I like that. The heartbeat.
Yeah. It's basically how much we're producing as a whole, all the goods and services that
Right.
make up the economy. The pie, if you will.
Okay, I'm liking this pie analogy.
The pie. And that pie needs to keep growing, right? So everyone can get a bigger slice.
Right, right. More pie for everyone.
Exactly. Yeah. So that means better living standards, more opportunities, the whole shebang.
Gotcha. So how do we even measure this pie? How much is it growing?
So that's where real GDP comes in,
Okay.
which is basically the scorecard for economic growth, right? It tells us how much the economy is producing, but after we adjust for things like inflation.
Okay, so it's like the real deal, not just like inflated
Yeah,
numbers.
exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. But here's where it gets kind of interesting. There's like short-term growth.
Okay.
It's like squeezing more juice out of the existing lemons, right?
Making do.
And then there's long-term growth, which is more about planting more lemon trees.
Ah, okay. So short term, we're working with what we got. Long term, we're thinking bigger picture.
Exactly.
Got it.
Yeah. So in the short term, it all comes down to something called aggregate demand,
Aggregate demand. Okay.
which is kind of like the total spending power in an economy, right? So when people buy stuff, businesses invest, the government spends money on things like, infrastructure.
Okay.
That fuels short-term growth.
It's like giving the economy a little shot of espresso.
Yeah, exactly. A quick boost.
Okay, I like it. But what about those lemon trees we got to plant for the long haul? What drives that kind of sustained growth?
Well, for long-term growth, we need to invest in things that, will pay off over time. So things like capital investment,
Okay.
building new factories, upgrading technology, stuff like
So
that.
the stuff that lasts
Yeah, exactly. Then you've got labor supply, right? More people working means more output.
makes sense.
And of course, we can't forget about productivity, right? Each worker producing more, becoming more efficient, ideally because of things like, better technology and education.
So it's not just about working harder, it's about working smarter too.
Exactly, yeah.
Okay.
But here's the thing. It's not just about, tangible stuff like factories or robots. The secret ingredient
Ooh, secret ingredient.
for long-term growth is actually something called institutional factors.
Institutional factors. Okay, you're going to have to break that down for me because that sounds kind of, well, a little bit abstract.
Yeah. Okay, so think about it like this. Imagine you're trying to, bake that pie in a kitchen, right?
Okay.
But the kitchen has a leaky roof, faulty wiring, and everyone's arguing over who gets to use the oven. It's chaos, right?
Yeah, that pie is not going to turn out so well.
Exactly. So institutional factors are things like, stable government, the reliable legal system, property rights,
Right.
all those things that create a predictable and fair environment for businesses to actually, thrive.
Ah, okay. So it's like we're building a solid foundation for that kitchen
Yeah,
so we can all bake those pies without the drama.
exactly.
Okay, I'm starting to see how that all ties together. So are you saying that a country, even if it has like all the resources, all the technology, if they have a corrupt government, they might struggle to grow in the long term?
Yeah, that's a really great point, and it shows how just pouring money into an economy isn't always enough.
Right.
You look at countries with like really low rankings for things like ease of doing business, or they have high levels of corruption. Those places often struggle to attract investment, foster innovation,
Right.
and that ultimately hampers their long-term growth potential.
So it's not just about the ingredients, it's about like the recipe, the environment where everything comes together.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, that makes sense. Speaking of recipes, China has been cooking up some serious economic growth over the past few decades, right?
they have. Yeah.
What's their secret sauce?
Well, I mean, they've definitely seen incredible growth
Right.
fueled by massive investments, really rapid technological advancement, and a major shift from agriculture to manufacturing and services.
So they basically built a whole new kitchen and trained a whole new generation of bakers.
Yeah, pretty much
Okay.
a super efficient kitchen.
But here's the million-dollar question. Is that recipe replicable?
Yeah.
Can other countries follow the same path, or is there something unique about China's situation?
That's the question, right, that a lot of economists are thinking about. Can a model that relies so heavily on exports
Right.
and sometimes, not ideal labor conditions, is that really sustainable for everyone in the long run?
Right.
And what about the impact on the environment with that kind of rapid industrialization?
Yeah, it's like they say there's no such thing as a free lunch, right?
All right.
There are always trade-offs, and we need to understand those when we're talking about economic growth. But hold on, before we get too deep into the downside, I want to unpack this idea of growth potential a little bit more,
Okay.
because I keep hearing this term output gaps, and it sounds a little bit ominous, to be
It
honest.
does. It sounds a bit scary, but output gaps are actually a really fascinating concept.
Okay.
They help us to understand the difference between what an economy is actually producing and what it could be producing if it was like running at full steam.
So it's like comparing a car stuck in rush hour traffic to that same car just cruising down an open highway.
Yes, exactly. And just like with cars, there are different scenarios, right? So a positive output gap means the economy's exceeding expectations.
Okay.
Like it's hit the nitrous button.
Okay.
Things are moving fast,
Right.
which could be exciting, but it also leads to overheating.
Right.
Right. Think about inflation, where prices start rising too quickly because demand is outstripping supply.
It's like that feeling when you like cram for an exam and ace it, but then afterwards you're totally burnt out.
Yeah, exactly. Short-term gain, but then
Yeah.
what happens after?
So what about when things aren't so rosy? You know, when the economy is more like that car stuck in traffic.
Well, that would be a negative output gap.
Okay.
Right. So that means the economy is underperforming. There's a lot of unused potential, like factories sitting idle, people out of work.
Right, right.
Not a good situation.
Yeah, definitely not a party.
No.
Okay, so we've got these gaps between actual and potential output that can be positive or negative.
Yeah.
But how does this all connect back to the idea of economic growth being this kind of roller coaster ride? You know, like all the booms and busts we hear about.
That is a fantastic question, and it leads us right into the concept of economic cycles.
Wait, hold on. Before we jump into another complex concept, let's just take a breather and recap what we've learned so far, all right?
Okay, sounds good.
So we explored the different types of economic growth, short-term versus long-term,
Right.
the factors that drive each. We talked about the importance of those institutional factors,
Yeah, those are
the
crucial.
rules of the game,
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we dipped our toes into this whole world of output gaps,
Yeah.
which tell us how much an economy is actually producing compared to, what it could be producing.
Right.
So where do we go from here?
Well, now that we know how to measure economic growth and what fuels it, it's time to look at the bigger picture,
Okay.
the ebb and flow of economic activity,
Ooh, the ebb and flow.
the ups and downs,
Like it.
that create these roller coaster-like cycles that we call economic cycles.
Okay. You've piqued my curiosity. Let's dive into those economic cycles.
All right, so picture this. The economy is like a giant party, right?
Okay.
Sometimes it's like a wild bash. Everyone's spending, businesses are booming, the music's pumping.
I like where this is going.
That's what we call the boom phase.
Okay, so the boom when the economy is firing on all cylinders.
Exactly. Yeah, it's that exciting time when the economy is exceeding its potential, surpassing expectations, maybe even getting a little overheated.
Right,
Remember those positive output gaps we talked about?
right.
That's what's happening here. Demand is high, businesses are investing, jobs are being created. It's a time of prosperity.
But even the best parties have to end sometime, right?
Right.
What happens when the music stops and the guests start heading home?
Well, that's when the economy starts to cool down and we enter what's called a downturn.
Okay,
Sometimes it's a gradual slowdown, other times it's more abrupt, but it's basically a signal that the party's over,
right.
time to clean up.
Time to clean up the confetti.
Exactly. And one of the first signs of a real problem is something called a recession.
Ah, the dreaded R word.
Yeah, exactly.
Isn't that when things start to feel a bit shaky, like some people are losing their jobs, businesses are struggling?
Yeah, exactly. Technically, a recession is defined as 2 consecutive quarters of declining GDP. It's like the hangover after that epic party.
Ouch.
Not fun at all. And this is where those negative output gaps come into play. Demand starts to weaken businesses, pull back on investment, and unemployment starts to rise.
So it's like a domino effect,
Yeah.
One thing leads to another, and suddenly that economic party has turned into kind of a bummer.
Yeah, it can be a bit of downer.
But what happens next? Does the economy just stay in this slump forever?
Thankfully, no. Just like you can't party all the time, you can't stay in a recession forever either.
Okay, good.
Eventually, things start to turn around and we enter what's called the recovery phase.
Okay.
Think of it as the morning after the party. You might be a bit groggy, but you're starting to feel a glimmer of hope.
So during the recovery, things start to look up again, businesses start hiring, people start spending, and the economy gets back on track.
You got it. Yeah, during the recovery, those negative output gaps start to shrink, confidence gradually returns, and we start to see positive growth again. It's like the economy is slowly but surely getting back on its feet and ready to dance again.
Okay, I'm starting to see how this whole economic cycle thing works. It's like a constant ebb and flow, boom, downturn, slump, recovery, then a boom again.
Yeah, it's a cycle.
But what does this all actually mean for us? The everyday people riding this economic roller coaster.
Right.
What's the impact of all these ups and downs?
That's a crucial question because ultimately economic growth or the lack of it impacts everyone. Let's start with the good stuff. The benefits of a booming economy. When the economy is growing, businesses are thriving, jobs are being created, people have more money in their pockets.
Right.
This means they can buy more stuff, which further fuels the growth. It's a virtuous cycle.
So it's like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Exactly.
Everyone benefits when the economy is doing well.
In theory, yes, a strong economy usually means higher incomes, more job opportunities, and a better overall standard of living. And when people have more money, they tend to spend more, which boosts demand and keeps the economy humming along.
But we all know that things aren't always so rosy. What about the downsides of economic growth? What happens when things get out of control, when that party gets a little too wild?
Well, like we touched upon earlier, one of the biggest risks of a booming economy is inflation. Remember that positive output gap?
Yeah.
When demand outstrips supply, prices start rising too quickly. Suddenly, that extra money in your pocket doesn't buy as much anymore. And for people on fixed incomes like retirees, inflation can be a real problem.
So even when the economy is growing, there can be winners and losers.
Unfortunately, yes. And beyond inflation, there's the environmental impact to consider. Historically, a lot of economic growth has been fueled by activities that are, let's face it, not so good for the planet. Think burning fossil fuels, deforestation, pollution, things that can have long-term consequences for the environment and ultimately for all of us.
It's like that saying, there's no such thing as a free lunch. We might be enjoying the benefits of economic growth now, but what's the cost to future generations?
That's a question we all need to be asking ourselves. And then there's the whole issue of inequality. Even when an economy grows, the benefits don't always trickle down to everyone equally. We often see a widening gap between the rich and the poor, with those at the top benefiting disproportionately, while those at the bottom struggle to keep up.
That's not just about how fast an economy grows, but also about how that growth is distributed.
Right.
If the benefits are only going to a select few, is that truly sustainable in the long run?
That's a great point, and it highlights the complexity of economic growth. It's not a simple equation where more always equals better. We need to be thinking about the quality of growth, not just the quantity. We need to ask ourselves, is this growth sustainable? Is it inclusive? Is it benefiting everyone or just a select few?
These are some really important questions, and it seems like there are no easy answers, but to make things a bit more concrete, can you give us some real-world examples of how these different aspects of economic growth play out?
Absolutely. Let's take the example of the UK between 1992 and 2008. They experienced a period of sustained economic growth, low inflation, and generally good times. But it was also a period of rising inequality, with the gap between the rich and poor widening significantly. And then, of course, came the 2008 financial crisis, which threw the whole global economy into a tailspin.
Right. It's a stark reminder that even seemingly stable economies can be vulnerable to shocks, and that unsustainable growth can have long-lasting consequences. What about a more recent example? How has the COVID-19 pandemic impacted economic growth?
Well, the pandemic was like hitting the emergency brake on the global economy. We saw a sharp recession in 2020 as lockdowns and restrictions brought economic activity to a standstill. But then we saw a gradual recovery as vaccines became available and restrictions were lifted. However, the recovery has been uneven, with some sectors bouncing back faster than others. And many countries are still grappling with the long-term economic and social impacts of the pandemic.
It's clear that understanding economic growth is more important than ever, especially in these uncertain times.
It really is, yeah.
But with all these complexities and nuances, it can be hard to know where to even begin. What are some key takeaways for our listeners? Things they should keep in mind when they hear about economic growth in the news or in their daily lives.
I think one of the most important things to remember is that economic growth is not an end in itself. It's a means to an end. The goal shouldn't be just to grow the economy for growth's sake, but to use that growth to improve people's lives, create opportunities, and build a more sustainable future.
I couldn't agree more. It's about creating a world where everyone has a chance to thrive, not just a select few. But with all the challenges we've discussed, from inflation to inequality to environmental sustainability, is that even possible? Is there a way to achieve economic growth that is both robust and equitable, that benefits everyone without jeopardizing the planet? Perhaps that's a question we can explore further in the next part of our deep dive.
I think that's an excellent idea. We've laid the groundwork. Now it's time to delve into some potential solutions and explore some alternative ways of thinking about economic growth.
All right, listeners, stay tuned, because in the final part of our deep dive, we're going to unpack some of the big questions surrounding sustainable and inclusive growth. We'll explore some innovative ideas, challenge conventional wisdom, and hopefully leave you with some food for thought about how we can create a more just and prosperous future for all. Okay, so we've talked about the ups and downs of economic cycles. We've seen how growth can be this kind of double-edged sword.
Yeah,
And we've really been wrestling with some big questions about sustainability, about fairness.
right,
But I'm really curious, where do we go from here? Is there a way to actually achieve economic growth that doesn't cost us the planet
right.
or leave millions of people behind?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? And thankfully, it's a question that more and more people are asking. From the economists and policymakers to just everyday people,
Right?
there's this growing recognition that we need to kind of rethink our traditional models of growth
Okay.
and find ways to make it more sustainable, more inclusive.
Okay, I'm all ears. What are some of the idea out there, the potential paths forward?
Well, one approach is to focus on what's called green growth.
Green growth. Okay.
Yeah. It's the idea that we can decouple economic growth from environmental damage,
Okay.
that we can kind of have our cake and eat it too,
Right.
so to speak. This involves investing in renewable energy, promoting energy efficiency, and finding ways to produce and consume goods and services in a more sustainable way.
So it's about finding ways to grow the economy without literally trashing the planet.
Exactly. Yeah. Think of it as baking that pie, but using solar-powered ovens and locally sourced ingredients.
Okay, I like it.
Yeah. And it's not just about the technology either. It's about changing our consumption patterns,
Right.
reducing waste, and embracing this more kind of circular economy
Okay.
where resources are reused and recycled rather than just being thrown away.
Right, right. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. But what about, the social side of things? How do we make sure that the benefits of growth are shared more fairly? That everyone gets a slice of that sustainably baked pie.
Yeah, that's where the concept of inclusive growth comes in.
Okay.
It's about creating an economy that works for everyone, not just those at the top. So this means investing in education and skills training,
Right,
making sure people have access to health care,
right.
affordable housing, and promoting policies that just create a more level playing field.
So it's about addressing those deeper issues that can hold people back,
Yeah,
regardless of how fast the economy's growing.
exactly. It's about recognizing that true prosperity isn't just about GDP.
Right.
It's about creating a society where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential, to live a life of dignity, and to, just have a sense of purpose.
These ideas, green growth, inclusive growth, they sound really promising.
They do.
But I imagine there are challenges too.
Oh, yeah.
Trade-offs. How do we balance economic growth with protecting the environment? How do we make sure that policies designed to reduce inequality don't end up stifling innovation or discouraging investment?
Yeah, those are the tough questions that we need to be asking.
Yeah.
There are no easy answers. It's going to require a lot of careful consideration,
Right.
collaboration, a willingness to kind of experiment and adapt. But what's exciting is that there's this growing global movement of people who are really committed to finding those solutions,
Yeah.
who believe that we can create a better future for everyone.
I'm sensing a but coming.
Well, it wouldn't be a deep dive if we didn't explore some of the more radical ideas out there, right? Remember we touched upon this concept of degrowth earlier?
Oh, yeah, yeah. The idea that maybe endless growth just isn't the answer.
Exactly, yeah. It's a provocative idea.
Yeah.
And it's gaining traction, especially among people that are really concerned about, the limits of our planet's resources
Right.
and the social and environmental consequences of, just constantly pursuing more and more.
Right.
So degrowth proponents argue that we need to shift our focus away from just always wanting more
Right.
and instead prioritize things like well-being,
Okay.
sustainability, and social justice.
Wow, that's a pretty big shift in thinking.
It is. It is.
It's almost like questioning the fundamental assumptions that our whole economic system is built on.
Yeah, it is. And while it might sound radical, I think it's really important to have these conversations,
Right.
to challenge the status quo, to explore all the options. Maybe degrowth isn't the answer, but it forces us to ask those tough questions
Right.
about what truly matters, what kind of future we want, and how we're going to get there.
So if I'm hearing you correctly, there's no one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
It's about exploring different approaches, being open to new ideas, and finding what works best for each, specific situation.
Exactly. And that's where you, our listeners, come in.
Ooh, okay.
The more we understand about, how complex this whole thing is, the better equipped we are to engage in these important conversations, to demand better policies, and to make choices in our own lives that contribute to a more just and sustainable future.
I love that. It's about empowering ourselves,
Yeah,
with knowledge, challenging assumptions, and taking action.
Exactly.
Well, on that note, I want to thank you, our amazing expert,
Oh, thank
for
you.
guiding us through this really fascinating and thought-provoking deep dive
My pleasure.
into the world of economic growth. It's been really enlightening. I know I'm walking away with a much deeper understanding of this really complex and ever-evolving topic.
It's been a pleasure talking with you.
And to our incredible listeners, we hope you've enjoyed this deep dive as much as we have. We encourage you to keep exploring these ideas, to challenge those assumptions, and to be active participants in shaping a more just and sustainable future. Until next time, keep those knowledge-seeking gears turning.